This video is part of Design Bytes Season 1, covering game design on The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. All 5 episodes are available to watch now, so make sure you check them out after this one. Season 1 will contain some spoilers, so it's recommended that you play Breath of the Wild first before watching these episodes. Enjoy! The Blood Moon mechanic found in The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is a great case study in game design. It's a very intentional mechanic that the developers definitely wanted players to know about, but its actual intended purpose is to act as a consistent failsafe for the game world. Normally, these kind of mechanics aren't presented in such transparency to players, so on this episode of Design Bytes, let's explore what the Blood Moon mechanic is, why I love its inclusion in Breath of the Wild, and the implications it has on the overall game design. The Blood Moon mechanic is a pretty straightforward design choice that occurs relatively infrequently in the world of Hyrule, but it has a big impact on how the game works. When a Blood Moon happens, Hyrule essentially gets reset, with most of the important things in it being restored. This means that all enemies, overworld bosses, wildlife, and loose weapons are regenerated, so players always have a way to obtain new resources from an otherwise depleted game world. The frequency of Blood Moons appearing is pretty low, and the game marks an upcoming one by having the sky quickly fill with bright red hues while distorted particle effects cover the screen. A quick cutscene with Zelda narrating some flavor text happens afterwards, and players can see that Ganon's minions are being revived. Initially, I was never really sure if this mechanic needed to be here, because Hyrule is just that big, but in retrospect, I think it's pretty clear that its inclusion was an absolute necessity. Because the developers don't know where players are gonna go and they don't know what they're gonna do, it's impossible to know what resources they'll need at any given time. Having renewable resources is a smart way of ensuring that players can't accidentally do something that blocks them from accomplishing an important task. Using this catch-all solution was the cleanest and simplest method the designers could have gone for, in my opinion, because it's easy to understand without any unneeded complexity. But let's also be real for a second. The Blood Moon features a pretty obvious case of game design found in Breath of the Wild, so there's nothing exceptional about it at the surface level. Still, I think it's a brilliant inclusion because of how well the designers contextualized this failsafe within the game world while also making it a part of the gameplay. Don't get me wrong, designers do this all the time with all kinds of things in games, but I think it's a little bit different here for a couple of reasons. I remember the first time I saw the Blood Moon in Breath of the Wild. I was east of the Great Plateau when the sky started to rapidly fade to red, and the only thought I kept having was, oh my god, what's happening? What's going on? What did I do? I thought I had done something that was either really bad or that I triggered something really special, and I had no idea what was going on. This happened during the launch weekend for the Switch, and both my brother and I had started playing Breath of the Wild together. I was on the TV and he was in handheld mode, and when the sky started to turn that blazing red, it captivated both of us because it was such a strong visual contrast to the peaceful serenity of Hyrule that we came to know within the first few hours of the game. Of course, the cutscene of enemies respawning played, and that helped us understand what just happened and why it was included. But that strong visual juxtaposition of the first Blood Moon compared to the normally peaceful Hyrule made it so memorable. The visual design of this event is an outstanding piece of work from Nintendo's artists. Think about how most other games or even past Zelda titles handle respawning enemies and resources. Things usually come back when leaving or re-entering a room or loading zone, and that wasn't going to work in Breath of the Wild with its wide open spaces, so the developers had to do something else instead. I like the Blood Moon solution because I think they made a smart decision to make it part of the ethos of Hyrule. Ganon is an omnipresent force capable of great dark magic, so the Blood Moon fits both the game's general storyline and plot, along with Calamity Ganon's character. It's not anything that's particularly deep, but I like how it makes enemy respawns purposeful. It makes Ganon as a character feel more threatening, and it makes the world seem even more dangerous since he's the one who can revive his minions and followers at any point. This contextualization is a wonderful method of blending world building and gameplay in a novel and visually interesting way. Outside of respawning resources, there's a couple of other gameplay applications the Blood Moon has. It's needed for a few quests to uncover shrines, which is a novel use of its presence that cements its place in the ethos of Hyrule. There's an additional hidden mechanic where cooking food just before and after a Blood Moon will guarantee a bonus on the dish. It's a neat inclusion I really like, because the Blood Moon is supposed to represent a moment where Calamity Ganon is threatening the world, but in reality, Link is also getting some help out of it too. After discovering that little trick, I'm pretty sure I became the greatest chef known throughout Hyrule, because I would cook as much as possible during a Blood Moon occurrence. Let's see. I've got a mushroom risotto with a side of glazed veggies and a wild berry crepe ready for table 5. Order up! While I really do love both of these uses of the Blood Moon mechanic, I think Nintendo probably could have pushed it even further and used it for more gameplay applications. Enemies before or during a Blood Moon could become more aggressive because of its curse, or maybe they could hit harder in combat during those time periods. Obtaining weapons near a Blood Moon could give them an automatic bonus similar to cooking a dish, or maybe during this time Link's map could become scrambled, causing a little bit of disorientation. I'm sure there could have been a lot more shrine side quests related to it, and I think if the player had a way to manipulate or influence when a Blood Moon happened, there could have been even more gameplay implications similar to something like the Sun Song in Ocarina of Time. If the Blood Moon or a similar mechanic returns in future games, I hope Nintendo goes this route. Despite everything said so far, I do think there are a couple of downsides to the Blood Moon mechanic, but both of these things I consider to be outpaced by the positives of it. While the Blood Moon does a great job of conforming to Calamity Ganon's character and the world of Hyrule, there is a negative that happens with a different aspect of the world building. Because enemies are always regenerating, the sense of progress towards cleansing Hyrule from Ganon's clutches due to Link's heroics may get lost for some players. I completely acknowledge this perspective and think it's totally valid, but I don't think it's a strong enough reason to consider removing the Blood Moon mechanic because the gameplay implications of respawning resources is much more important and impactful to the overall experience. Otherwise, the only other negative I can see with the Blood Moon is that it's not always clear when one will occur, and there's no obvious way for a player to trigger one. Sure, there's an NPC near a stable that mentions if there will be a Blood Moon on the current night, but consistently warping back there to check out what he has to say is not only inefficient, but something players are not likely to do. The period between Blood Moons can also be really long or really short, and this varied amount of time between them means that a player can never predict when one will happen and take advantage of it for the side quests that use it. Although that can be a little annoying, I actually see this as a positive, because the sporadic nature of the Blood Moon gives me feelings of not knowing when Ganon's curse will strike next. It keeps the surprise intact when the particle effects and red sky start to take over the screen, and I don't think there would be enough strategic use outside of the side quests to justify always knowing when one will occur. The Blood Moon in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is a mechanic that I really like and something I think the industry could really learn from. Its purpose in-game is crystal clear to players, but it's contextualized in a way that contributes to both the world building of Hyrule while also aiding the core gameplay. It's not perfect, and Nintendo certainly could have pushed it further, but it's a simple and well thought out mechanic that contributes a lot to the experience of Breath of the Wild.